Can we open by talking about Anthony Richardson? I feel like we have to, because this is what everybody on social media is going crazy for. It is it feels like 8th week in a row here for Richardson. Not quite, because he's missed a little bit of time, but where the stat sheet just ain't pretty. It just does not read pretty here for Anthony Richardson. Goes 10 for 32 with 175 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He had 4 big-time throws in this game, though. Had a couple of drops. We'll get into that in a second. He was only 2 for 15 passing in the first half of this game. They have a chance at the end, but Houston Texans, they end up winning this game at home. And so, I don't know, Seth, just overall, you've watched Anthony Richardson. What are your thoughts? I'll let you start. You can start with the good. You can start with the bad. You can start with what's working, what isn't. Talk to me about Anthony Richardson. What's your thoughts on this player?
Well, the bad is pretty obvious. Like, the accuracy and decision-making is mostly not good. I think the accuracy is probably worse than the decision-making right now. I think when you watch the tape, it's like, this kind of happens a lot, where it's like never as bad as you want to. You go into it thinking, wow, this might be the worst. Like, I might be better than Anthony Richardson. And then you watch it and you're like, okay, no, this is a real NFL quarterback. So yeah, I don't think it's as bad. The tape isn't as bad, but the accuracy is just like really bad. And it's especially bad on like throws where he's got to throw the receiver on the run, especially across the field. Something we talked about with Lamar Jackson recently, and how good he is at throwing guys in stride as they're moving, horizontally. He misses guys. He puts it behind. He puts it too far in front. So even like slants, slants aren't a high value route. It's a 6-yard route, let's say, 3 steps, then you hit the slant route. Like, but if you put it on the money and guy can catch it in stride, all of a sudden that, catch at 6 yards becomes a 12-yard completion, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't get that from Anthony Richardson. But I think there's still some stuff to like. His ability in the pocket is top notch. He gets out of trouble a lot. Now, what he does when he gets out of trouble, that's a problem. But I think there's enough to work with there. And it's something that everyone's talked about, is this like pressure to sack thing that we like to look at, the stat that we really like to look at when we're talking about quarterbacks, especially we're talking about projecting quarterbacks forward. And we're still in the projecting Anthony Richardson forward stage.
Right.
He doesn't take sacks. He gets out of trouble. So there's that base to work with, is something at least. And you're just hoping for, I'm not saying it's good. Like I said, the film is better than the stats indicate, but it's still not elite level, obviously. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot to work with, to work towards. But I don't know what you think. I'd still start him at this point.
I'd 100% start him. And look, I understand that like things aren't maybe as good as you would want them to be, or as consistent as you would want them to be, especially when you have a veteran who's won in this league like Joe Flacco sitting behind him. It's very tempting. I mean, Dalton Washington, when we were doing the grades release show, Dalton was like, if you start Joe Flacco, you might make the playoffs with this team. And I said, okay, but that's still, to me, that's stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies. Like, that's how I would, because if you make the playoffs with Joe Flacco, I guess you could talk about, all right, well, it sets up a winning culture, and you get to maybe host a playoff game, or just make it as a wild card, and then you get that playoff experience. Maybe that sort of like unquantifiable stuff is worth it for you. But in my opinion, you're not winning a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco at this point in his career. You could maybe win a Super Bowl with Anthony Richardson someday. You don't really know. And to me, the part of this that I don't like the most, and again, I'm not Shane Steichen. I'm not around the building all the time. I think that the people who are in the building maybe have a better understanding of exactly the unquantifiable X factor stuff that might go into making a decision about like benching this guy or going to Joe Flacco or whatever. But when you look at Anthony Richardson, he was a 1-year starter at Florida. Like, he was viewed as a sort of a project long-term quarterback in the NFL coming out of Florida. He didn't have like all this experience. He wasn't Bo Nix. He didn't have 5 years as a starter, all this starting experience. And you get to the NFL, looks all right through the first 4 games. There were some flashes. There was some good stuff. And then he missed the rest of the year. He had concussions. Then he missed the rest of the season. So he barely played last year. And now, he also misses time this year. So if you want to talk about injuries, I think that's another thing. But to sit here, what is he, 10, 11 games into his NFL career off of the scouting report that you read of him coming out of Florida and go, yeah, I mean, see, he's just not where he needs to be. That timeline doesn't make sense. I think that teams do a really bad job overall in the NFL of getting really impatient. And I understand there's millions of dollars on the line. You want to have people in the stands. You want things to be going well. But when you draft Anthony Richardson, you're not drafting him to be good in year 1 and year 2, even fully healthy year 1 and year 2. You're drafting Anthony Richardson to be superstar level year 3, maybe 4, and then 4 for the rest of his career. That's the timeline with Anthony Richardson. The timeline was always his entire rookie contract. And I think that the way that we're looking at him right now is an example of how we look at what CJ Stroud did last year and we go, see, why can't everybody be CJ Stroud? CJ Stroud's the exception. He's not the bar that we should hold all of these quarterbacks to, especially given Anthony Richardson's background. So when you watch this game, yeah, he is not completing easier passes the way that you need to. He's got to find out how to complete these 1 to 9 yard throws specifically. But Seth, I mean, I'm watching the game yesterday. I'm watching the All-22. He's got some sick throws, some absolute beauties. Yeah, okay, it doesn't look perfect all the time, but how are we 11 games into this guy's career, whatever it is, and we're ready to just pull the plug on it? Now, I'll tell you, the actual tangible part of this where I would say, okay, I understand why you're at least entertaining this, is him saying, yeah, I was tired on 3rd down, so I took myself out of the game. That's entirely different, though. That is, does the rest of the locker room respect you at that point? Because it's the same sort of argument that we had with Deshaun Watson, where we were mad at Kevin Stefanski because he really wasn't allowed to bench Deshaun Watson. I'm convinced. I don't know that for sure, but I'm convinced that's the case. But at the same time, you're having to stare the other 53 guys on the active game day roster in the face and go, yeah, I'm actively making the worst decision at quarterback because we have to. If people in the Indianapolis Colts locker room start looking at Anthony Richardson like, you're taking yourself out of the game when we need you most, that's when maybe I start to understand, okay, that might start a mutiny in the locker room. But in terms of Anthony Richardson's play, I get it. It's not where you want it to be. It can look ugly at times. It can also look incredible at times. And the expected timeline of where we're at with him in his career as a 1-year starter at Florida, barely playing last year, and then even being hurt this year. I mean, that's not nearly enough to go to somebody else and to bench him, in my opinion. That's my thoughts on him.
I'm pretty much on the same page as you. I'm Joe Flacco. Let's start there. Joe Flacco is not a good quarterback. Let's not act like the guy who's on the bench is some elite player. Joe Flacco is a mid quarterback who got lucky that Amari Cooper carried him for about 5 weeks last year. We don't have to beat around the bush about how good Joe Flacco is. So yes, Joe Flacco might get you to the playoffs. That's not a guarantee either, by the way.
Right.
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 But and then I agree. Are they going to win the Super Bowl with Joe Flacco? No, they're not. Sorry. No, they're not. That's what the Browns said last year. And guess what happened? He threw 9 picks against the Texans in the playoff game. That is not going to happen. Now, do we look at it differently? Like you're saying, do we look at it differently because we have no skin in the game? Yeah, we do. Because if I'm Shane Steichen, and if I'm Chris Ballard, who seems like he can never get fired, if I'm those guys, it's man, I don't want to finish. I don't want to put a quarterback in who we can't move the ball with, and then we start losing games because the defense is not great either. Certainly, their pass defense isn't very good. So if, we can't move the ball, and we're going to start losing games. No one's going to care. Jim Irsay is not going to care. He's going to fire me, and it's going to be a waste of my. I got to save my own ass here. And just barely making the playoffs with Joe Flacco might be enough to save your ass if you're Shane Steichen.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because Shane Steichen has shown that he can do stuff with mid-tier quarterbacks, right? You can see he can create a better offense than kind of the play of the kind of isolated play of the quarterback. He's done that before. So that's where I could see them going to Flacco. But at the same time, like, yeah, I'm in agreement. Like, you got to get Richardson on the field and just let him play and see what happens. Because I get it's a very different discussion when you have a guy like, the first guy that popped into my head was Josh Rosen. Because you have a guy like Josh Rosen who played a lot of years, starting at UCLA, and then came in without traits, without elite physical traits, and couldn't play right away. And that was it, right? We have the complete opposite here with Anthony Richardson. You have a guy with traits, and like I said, those traits have carried over. His ability to escape pressure has carried over. And he hasn't played a lot, like you said. It's like 18 starts since he was a high school senior or whatever. So I think there's a lot more to get out of Anthony Richardson. So I don't know if benching him is the right thing. I certainly don't know if benching him for the rest of the season is the right thing. I could see a situation where maybe you have a plan where you bring him back at some point if you bench him now. But I don't think benching him for the rest of the season is really good long term.
Yeah,
because again, Joe Flacco is not getting you where you really want to go. And Joe Flacco is going to start losing games too, by the way.
Right.
I'm sorry to hate on Joe Flacco. I've liked watching him over the years. And I did like watching him throw jump balls to Amari Cooper last year. But they're good. There's losses coming when Joe Flacco plays quarterback for you. He's not going to win the next 10 games.
Yeah, they barely beat the Raiders, right? When they were playing the Raiders, and it was basically, I think it came down to Joe Flacco made a big time throw in the game, and Gardner Minshew was not able to do so, if I remember correctly. Was it the Raiders or who did they? No, it was the Titans. It was the Titans. I'm thinking of the Titans. Yeah. So it was that Titans game where it was okay, well, Will Levis wasn't able to make the one big time throw at the end, and Joe Flacco sort of was, and it wasn't even this huge big time throw, but that's what got you a 3-point win against the Titans. And so I want to hit on what you said. I don't think that Shane Steichen's in danger of losing his job. I think that certainly when you look at the situation and it's okay, well, what Richardson has sort of turned out to be, he's making the most of the situation. So I don't think he's in danger of losing his job. I think he's a really good head coach. So I don't think he necessarily has that kind of a pressure. I do think there is sort of a locker room pressure depending on how the locker room took Richardson tapping himself out of that game. So if it's a moot point, if the locker room doesn't care about it, if nobody's talking about it, fine. But if I can understand the other players on that team being you took yourself out voluntarily of a football game. We only get 17 of these bad boys. You only get so many opportunities to do this, and you're taking yourself out because you're tired. So I can understand the offensive linemen, the trench guys, everything being we don't take time. we don't take plays off because we're tired. So and I think that could be something. But again, going back to the Joe Flacco thing, to me, playing Joe Flacco is stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies. You might be oh, okay, this is something that could be a real good short-term thing for me. And there's not even a guarantee that it's that. Richardson could be something fantastic for you. And the way that you find that out is you have to play him. How many quarterbacks sit for 4 weeks and then all of a sudden they go, oh, yeah, I'm right again. I'm good to go. That to me just doesn't happen either. So I think if you bench him, even with the plan of bringing him back, that also sends the wrong message to the team. That sends a message to the other guys that are on the team that yeah, all right, coaching staff clearly doesn't think that this guy's it. And the second Richardson might start to struggle again when you put him back in there, it's only going to amplify those questions even more. So no, I don't think that outside of the locker room being pissed that he took himself out, I think it's crazy to bench him. I don't think that there is an excuse for it other than you're trying to win the football game next week. And if you want to tell yourself that, yeah, maybe Joe Flacco gives you that best opportunity. But you didn't draft this guy in the top 5 to give up on him a year and a half into his career. And not only a year and a half into his career, barely 10 starts into his career. That's crazy to me. It's crazy to me, especially because of the good things that he can do for you. And I do think that Richardson is improving. Like, is the footwork perfect for him? No, but there are plenty of times when I'm watching the game against the Texans where I think that he is much more fundamentally sound as a passer. Like, he's staying within structure. He has good fundamentals there. Is it perfect? Is it repetitive? Is it consistent? Not entirely, but it's a lot better than what it looked like in Gainesville. So there's evident progress there, and I think it's crazy that people would be talking about benching Anthony Richardson. I really do. I think it's. What was the stat that you had yesterday that you shared with me? He's like, since 2010. Yeah. Go ahead. I think you have it.
He's like the worst. I'm gonna vamp a little bit as I go into our chat here, but he's 44% completion rate, which is this season, which is 745th out of 747 quarterbacks since 2010.
Not great.
But 16.2 yards per completion, which is first out of those 747 quarterbacks. So you're getting something there, right? There's something. I'm going to give you another Joe Flacco stat as I'm looking up his career here. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't want to make this the anti-Joe Flacco podcast. But it's just for the people who think that like Joe Flacco was like the savior. Maybe I'm making up a guy here. I might be making up a human being who thinks that Joe Flacco is like an elite quarterback. He's been playing in this league since 2008, mostly as a starter. He has 2 seasons where he graded above 75.0 PFF grade. Now, you say whatever you want on PFF grade, but it does tell you a pretty good picture, even at his best, quote unquote. With the Ravens in his prime, like he was led by the defense. So he stuck around for a long time, and like I said, he had a good like box score time with the Browns last year, and so far with the Colts. But he might not even get you to the playoffs.
No, and I don't think that you're making that person up in your head, especially because I think there's a lot of people out there that just go like, Richardson's a bum, bench him. And this is the continuation of that conversation. You go, okay, for who? You don't just get to like bench a quarterback and then like you put prime Peyton Manning in there. That's not what we're talking about here. Like you're Andrew Luck's not still on the team. Like you're not putting like Andrew Luck back in the game. So a lot of people are frustrated with Anthony Richardson. I think the Colts fans are probably frustrated with him. But what's the alternative? And if the alternative is not better than letting Richardson ride it out and actually get through some snaps, I don't know what to tell. Honestly, if Goodson catches the football in the corner of the end zone, and if A.D. Mitchell gets another foot down in the corner of the end zone, they win this football game. Now, I understand, like, if he doesn't throw the interception to Jalen Petrie, okay, maybe they also still win this football game. But, like, even the throw to Petrie, like, Petrie's a ball hawk. He's an aggressive safety. Should he have seen that he was leaning a little bit more towards where he was coming from? And did the Texans really start to key in on those comeback routes at the sticks? Yeah, they did, but that's also just an aggressive defender making a good play. So I don't know. I think that a lot of people look at that and they just go like, oh, you can't attempt that throw. Obviously, it's a throw that he would love to have back. But you fixed 2 of the what could have very well been touchdowns, certainly from Anthony Richardson's side of things, in that game. Colts win. Like, Colts win this game. He's completing like less than 50% of his passes, and the Colts win the game because of what he can do for you. Because he's got 4 big-time throws in this game. So, I don't know, man. The goal is not to be, like, mediocre. Like, the goal is not to be average. And let's face it. If Joe Flacco is the quarterback of this team, again, I'm with you. I don't want this to be a Joe Flacco's number one hater podcast. It's not, I promise you. But if you put Flacco in, the best that you're probably going to finish is like 9-8, and maybe you barely make the playoffs at that point. That's worth it over what could be the payoff for Anthony Richardson? Because if you bench Richardson for Flacco and Flacco even has the season that you are talking about that you love, that he's going to make the wild card and maybe you get bounced in the first round, you're probably moving on from Richardson at the end of this season then at that point. Because that's some crazy fractured relationships and fractured faith at that point. And if you stick with him and you start him next year and, he continues to struggle because guess what? He didn't get the reps that he needed this year after you benched him, then he's not going to be great. You're going to bench him again. The trade value is only going to go down from there. And so I don't see a reality where the payoff is actually worth it to bench him. You drafted him number 4 overall for a reason. You are letting it ride. You owed it to him at the very least to let it ride for 2 seasons. At the very least 2 seasons. So, yeah. Any other Richardson thoughts before we move on?
2 things. He was under pressure a lot in this game. This is a good offensive line by the Colts that got dominated, to be honest, by Will Anderson and the Houston Texans D-line, which they generally don't. You know, it is, like I said, it's a good offensive line, though they might be playing with that Bernard Ryman for a while. I'm not sure what his injury situation is. And then the other thing is they haven't been good on quarterback run stuff this year, whether it's like zone read option, you know, design, quarterback power, quarterback sweep, that type of thing. Do you think they will continue to be bad on that stuff with Anthony Richardson at quarterback? Do you think that is a fundamental part of their offense to not be good at running the football with the quarterback? That is going to regress towards greener pastures. And if that happens, then the running game is better. Then you're not in as many third downs and yada, yada, yada. And you get a better outcome from Anthony Richardson. I'm not saying you might not get better play out of it this year in the passing game, but you get better outcomes because you're in better situations.